So our first key topic of our agenda is how to examine our portfolios through an environmental lens, namely linking investments to achieve net zero. And addressing the central issue for today's financial industry, I would like to introduce our keynote speaker. She is a civil engineer by training and initially specialized in transport projects, particularly in ports and shipping, eventually focusing on how the maritime industry impacts climate change before joining the European Investment Bank, where she has worked for nearly 25 years and serves as the chief climate change expert. Since 2018, she has highlighted the area of sustainable finance. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to present to you our special guest keynote, Nancy Saich. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I have to go back. No, forward. Okay. So, thank you very much for inviting me to do this keynote today. It's a great honor. It's also quite exciting. It's also a little bit nerve-wracking, as it's a long time, as many of you have mentioned, since I stood in front of real people and spoke to people who didn't appear on a little screen. So I hope that I remember how to handle the technology and how to speak to a real audience, but it's great to be here. I'm here representing the European Investment Bank, which is its headquarters here in Luxembourg, and is the EU's investment bank, owned by the 27 member states. But I'm also going to give you some insights today from my role as Rapporteur of the EU platform on sustainable finance, where I've had the privilege of working for the last year and a half with a wonderful group of people who recently published what's been called the Extended Taxonomy Report about going beyond green. So, before I get to that, I want to talk about sustainable finance in terms of not your industry and its current dilemmas with PAIs and SFDRs and sustainability preferences and data and usability, all of which are incredibly important, and I'm sure that you're putting a huge amount of effort into that. I want to start with why. Why are you being asked to do all these things? What is the reason for this massive change in the financial system that's going on now? Why is it so important? So I'm going to show you a few slides, not from the bank, not from the platform, but from the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which was formed in 1988 by the governments of the world, authorized by the UN General Assembly, to inform the governments of the world on a regular basis about the situation in terms of the climate science, its impacts on people, its impacts on business, and what needed to be done to address it. And that was in 1988. So the governments of the world already knew at that point that we were facing a global problem of climate change. But we're now in 2022. And the IPCC is in the middle of its 6th assessment report cycle, and it published already 3 reports last year, climate science, this year, adaptation and mitigation, and I'm just going to show you a very few slides from their own presentation. So the bit that maybe people don't understand at the moment is that we are really looking at a global change in climate and weather, which is based on changes in the system that have not been seen for thousands of years. So when we talk about why is it important, we have to understand that the economy that we're looking at has only been around really for, let's say, a few hundred years since the Industrial Revolution. The digital economy has only been around for a few decades. But the changes that we're looking at on the planet where we live are in the 1,000-year scale. And I just picked out one slide. They have enormous amounts of data and slides and presentations and videos, and of course you can just go to the IPCC website. Or you can wait till September when they will publish their synthesis report, which will bring it all together. A few thousand years, as you can see, in terms of the kind of changes we're seeing. But look at the one on the left. the highest CO2 concentration in at least 2 million years. Well, I don't know what you were doing 2 million years ago. I don't know. But I don't think we were in this kind of economy. So the idea that we have that we as a species, because we're only one species on this planet, can somehow continue as we are while we've made these changes to the system is clearly not logical. And that is why we have the Paris Agreement, because all the countries finally said, okay, we need to come up with something that's going to change what we're doing. And they agreed that everybody would make their efforts, and each country puts forward its own plans around keeping temperature to, well, the words are well below 2 degrees, with efforts for 1.5. But the IPCC has published another report on 1.5 degrees, showing the difference. It sounds so little, well below 2, 1.5. Probably you think, well, maybe that's half a degree, maybe I might need to take my jacket off in meetings. No, let's be clear. The half a degree makes huge differences globally, including here in Luxembourg. And there are many figures that they showed in their 1.5 degrees report. It means millions of more people affected by drought, millions more people migrating. But funnily enough, one of the biggest things that seems to shock people is that the difference between the 2 and the 1.5 is the loss of all warm water coral. All warm water coral. Just to give you some idea of the difference that half a degree makes. So when you look at GFANZ, the Global Financial Alliances, and I'm sure that many of your companies are part of GFANZ, it's important to remember it's 1.5 degrees focused. The EIB is 1.5 degrees focused. If you're interested in the future of humanity in a way that we recognize it, then we all need to be 1.5 degrees focused. And I just draw your attention to the word in the top line, immediate. Because I think that's the other problem that we have here, is we think it's about somebody else. We think it's about developing countries. We think it's about a different industry. And we also think that it's about 2050, which it is, but net zero by 2050 only matters if we reduce emissions by 50% by 2030. That's what we have to do. That's why immediate is so important. So it's not actually in the future. It's right now. The transition is right now. And everybody, including your industry and the EIB and every other part of the financial system, is part of that change that has to happen very quickly. So there are risks of inaction, but there are also massive opportunities. And what we're trying to do here is slow down the change so that humanity can manage it. So the IPCC report, when it was published, was called by the UN Secretary General Code Red for Humanity. Not Code Red for fish, not Code Red for bees, not Code Red for the Amazon, Code Red for humanity. That's us. That's our children, that's our businesses, that's our jobs, that's our water, that's our air. So we have to remember that. This amazing planet, and of course this is a wonderful picture from NASA, we only knew what it looked like, this beautiful blue planet, is the only planet we have. This is the place that we have to do our business on, and frankly, we're messing it up. So, big transition needed, but the really good news is it's happening. It's happening. I saw, and I'm sure you all read, that VW have run out of electric cars. So I say, bravo, fantastic, great news. Because it means that the change is happening a lot faster than people thought, and that's what we need, actually. But now I come back to Financial Stability Board, Mark Carney's famous speech in 2016, where he talked about 3 climate risks in the system. We've talked about temperature, sometimes called the transition risk, but he also talked about physical risk, and he also talked about legal and reputational risk. And this led to the setting up of TCFD, in order that we can start to prepare and manage those risks in the financial system. So what about physical risk? It's about the fact that the impacts of climate change are happening already, and they are happening to us. Of course, developing countries are less well able to deal with some of these. But as we saw in Luxembourg and Belgium and Germany, it's here and it's now. And we are vulnerable, and our businesses are vulnerable, and investments can be vulnerable. So when you get into a struggle over do no significant harm to adaptation, which I'm sure many of you have got in your mind, what are the data points? How do we apply this? Remember why we have to do that. Why is do no significant harm to adaptation to climate change so important? It's because most of Europe's economy, and frankly the global economy, is not resilient to climate change impacts at all at the moment. And that means that investments are at risk, and there are opportunities and finance that can flow to address that. Additionally, of course, when we talk about green finance, we're talking not just about climate change, but about biodiversity, the circular economy, water and depollution. The underlying reasons for all of those efforts in the financial system to green the financial system are because we do have a massive problem with biodiversity loss. In terms of circular economy, we are still extracting and using material on the Earth as if we had several Earths, but we don't have several Earths, we only have one. And I was discussing last night with some colleagues from the Financial Times, every time we reuse something, every time we recycle, melt down and use something, instead of extracting original material, we're also saving energy. So circular economy, again, are these challenging criteria and requirements? Yes, they are. Are they important? Yes, they are. And what we also have to think about is, while you're struggling with all this and trying to get your heads around why are we having to do this so fast, there's a whole new generation of investors that are coming into the market. They're young people and they're educated about climate change and the biodiversity crisis, and they have been to school in a period while this has been taught to them, and they understand, and they're quite angry, actually, because we are not exactly going to leave them the planet in a way that they were born into it. And they want to be able to express their sustainability preferences. So I know that it's challenging, and we heard just now that there's a lot happening in terms of them kicking in with MiFID in August. But the bottom line is, young investors want to be able to express, and indeed older investors, they want to be able to express where they want their money to go, because they want actually to help drive the transition. And I'll just mention pensions as well, because one of the interesting things I heard from EIOPA, the pensions authority, is that new workplace pensions are being challenged because new workers coming in do not want to contribute to a pension that isn't supporting the sustainable transition. Because they understand those new young people contributing in their first jobs. They understand that if they contribute to a pension fund for 30 years for something that's funding the wrong things, there probably won't be a planet that they want to have their pension in and retire in. So they're feeling quite strongly that they want the pensions that they invest in to be different. So ultimately, at the end of the day, it's not about public or EIB money. It's about private money. This is what's really driving the change right now, and I think that's hugely positive, even though it is challenging. And why is it so challenging? Because basically we haven't done very much. We haven't done very much for several decades, and we've woken up, we've got it, we see it, we need to act, but now we have to act very fast, and that's very difficult. So we need to move more finance to green, of course we do, but we also need to move finance away from significant harm. And to do that, we need to invest in transition away from activities that are causing the problems. And that involves, I think, a huge potential, something that my group in the platform has called amber transition. So that even if a company or an activity cannot get to green, moving away from significant harm to climate and environmental goals is a fantastic and very important transition that money and funds can flow into. And lastly, of course, it's also about people. And so we need just transition for the industries that actually do have to stop, close down in a managed way, whether it's coal mining or conventional engine manufacture or whatever it is. And you are all part of this action. Everybody can be climate champions, either personally, but in your companies. And that's fantastic to hear the efforts being made on gender equality. I'm very happy indeed. And there are many other things that is happening, I think, in your industry. But we also have to say, we have to grab these opportunities now, even if they're hard. Because there is this story about the frog in the pot. I'm sure you've heard that. I think it was a World Wildlife Fund advert, where if you put a frog in a pot and you heat it very slowly, the frog just sits in the pot. My question is, why are we still heating the pot? Can we please stop heating the pot? If we stop heating the pot, we don't cook the frog. So, of course, it would be good to get the frog out of the pot, but what we really need is to make that transition. And what I would say is, it's not hashtag don't look up. We've got more than 6 months. But it is hashtag don't give up, because we actually have 7 years left in this critical decade to reduce global emissions by 50%. That is massive. But we can do it. We can do it. The question is, can we do it fast enough to avoid some of the worst changes, which humanity, including here in Luxembourg, will find very challenging to manage? I believe we can. I believe your industry is absolutely part of this, adding the oomph, adding the urgency, and I believe we can do it, but we have to be doing it right now. And the reason why? There is no planet B, as was said at Paris when the Paris Agreement was signed. Thank you very much.
How are we doing on time? Do we have time for a question? Do we have time for a question? I have a question. So, your background is in shipping, in ports, and,
Ports, yeah.
so there's a trend with bringing specialists from other industries into the financial and investment space. So, who do you think should be running asset management companies today? Scientists, engineers, bankers?
Yes, well, I suppose I am a bit rogue because I'm an engineer who works for a bank, so I'm already a little bit unusual. I would say probably we need mixed teams. I certainly wouldn't propose to myself to run any of your industry. I would be very incompetent to do so. But having advisors and people in the teams that bring the real science and bring perhaps some of the engineering technological know-how, I think could be a very powerful combination. Actually, at the EIB, we have something that the president sometimes calls the secret weapon of the bank, which is the projects directorate. That's where I come from. And it's full of engineers and economists who are sector experts, who are looking at how the technologies are changing. So I think probably a mixture of scientists, engineers, and, of course, the finance experts together.
Excellent answer. Do we have time for one audience question? One audience question. Anyone? It's always a very polite crowd in Luxembourg. Anyone? No? Okay, no, you're waiting for the next one, aren't you? Okay, wonderful. Nancy, thank you so much.
Thank you.